Well, it's time for part 3 on this Honda Pilot engine rebuild. So in the previous video, tore down this whole motor. Basically, we had it running, just had a lot of bearing noise, and really suspected the crank bearings were bad, as well as this motor, it ate something, chewed up the piston, was kind of unsure what caused that. So after pulling the crankshaft and everything apart, the crank bearings were definitely rough. And I had suspicion that, so like down inside there, so this is a new rebuilt crankshaft here, but the old one, you can see the rollers inside there, the little needle bearings, but there was no cage. So I kind of suspected that that's what the motor ate. And upon pulling apart this old rod, there is the old cage for that rod bearing. And yeah, it chewed up the little separator pieces there and spit it out, and that's definitely what the piston and stuff ate. So we've got new rod bearings, new crank bearings on here. We've got our cases all cleaned up, and we are basically ready to start reassembling this thing. So we're going to start by putting this crankshaft back in, and then we're going to get it back into this chassis and get this thing running again and get it out of here. Okay, our crankshaft is installed again with new crank seals as well. So now it's time to probably start on this side here next. Get that counterbalancer back in there, as well as the main drive gear and everything else. Counterbalancer's in, everything's timed back up, the main drive gear's back on. So we're going to throw the flywheel on next, and then add like the starter reduction and stuff in there too. And then we should be able to put like this stator cover and water pump and everything else back on. We've got our flywheel and starter gears and everything back in place. Starter's installed as well. We're going to put this stator cover on next. So this is the water pump drive gear, which goes right down inside there. There's a little pin that needs to line up to it. And we've got a new gasket that's going to go around the edge as well. So that's coming on next. Stator cover's back on, recoil basket's back on, water pump's back on. So yeah, we're gonna put the recoil itself back on, and then we'll do all the top end stuff quick. And it should be basically back together. Alrighty, our motor is back together. So the only thing left to do is we need to fill up the oil for this counterbalancer down here. So here's the oil fill. It says it takes 0.24 liters. There's also, on the bottom side, a little oil check bolt, which would be right here. Basically, there's a little tube that kind of comes up in there. Fill it up so it starts coming out of this, out of that bolt hole right there, which that's the easiest way to do when it's in the chassis. But we'll just measure out some oil and fill this thing up, and then I think we're ready to drop this thing back into the frame. All right, we've got the motor back in place. So this mounts down there with a couple mounting bolts on the front. There's 2 of them up there, and then basically there's this big bracket that goes from the transmission to the engine. If you want to get a better idea of what it took to put this in and out, check out my part 2. I did a little more breakdown on what it would all take to remove this motor. So I've got all my coolant lines hooked up. I've got the hot carb hooked up as well. Basically right now I do need to put this brake disc back on. I had to remove that to get to a couple of those bolts for the engine mount. So we'll put that back on. We'll put our clutches back in place, the little clutch cover, and then the battery box, and then the pipe, and then it should be ready to start. Okay, I've got everything put back together. We got it full of coolant. Clutches are on, batteries on, pipes on, gas is on. Let's see if this thing will start. All right, we'll try it with some choke first. Well, let's go. Oh, that's a good start. Sounds a lot better. Before, when I got this thing started up the first time, well, one, it wouldn't idle very well. Well, we'll get this thing warmed up. But it just sounded rough. Just sounded like bearings just really rough bearings, just making a lot of noise. But it's definitely not doing that now. So we'll get this thing warmed up and heat it up a little bit and see what it does. Well, it seems to be running really good, but we got a little leak. This is coming from, you can see it there, on the water pump there. It's not the actual seal, it's I think the mechanical seal back there, which is something I did not replace on this. Sometimes on those mechanical seals, once you pull them apart and put them back together, they don't always seal quite right again. Basically, it's kind of two like Delrin surfaces that kind of press up against each other and seal. So what's happening right now is it's dripping from the weep hole, which basically tells you, hey, it's not sealing. So it's not coming from the cover, but I think I'm about to put a water pump seal on this thing, which kind of sucks since I've got the motor back in there. But to do that, we should be able to just pull this gas tank out of the way. It'll come out this way and have full access to it. And, but yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. So I just pulled the gas tank off. It wasn't too bad. Just kind of a few bolts and then unhooked the hoses and it slid out front way. See, in between those two bolts there, up inside there, there's a little weep hole, and that's where our coolant is coming from. So it's definitely the water pump seal. I'm gonna pull this cover off and inspect that seal a little bit. So there's our water pump there. I'll pop this guy off and we'll inspect those sealing surfaces back behind there. This is our impeller. The way these little mechanical seals work is that little white surface right there. It's like a real slippery plastic. I think it's Delrin probably is what it is. Anyway, what that does is it pushes up against another. This is kind of spring loaded here. There we go. It seals on this surface here. So this is stationary. When it sucks into here, it slides on this surface, and that's what the seal is. But if there's like any grooves or dirt or grit or anything between there, it won't seal. So I'm going to kind of clean and polish this up, see if I get lucky and see if it'll seal itself up again. Well, I got kind of lucky here. I just kind of polished up that sealing surface and no more leak. So far, seems to be sealing up. So we're gonna let this thing kind of fully warm up, run through a couple of heat cycles and see if it drips anymore. So it's all done and back together. The motor sounds real nice. Seems to run the way it's supposed to. So I took it for kind of the first couple drives, and you know, the first thing I kind of noticed was, you know, it ran good and everything, but it still felt like it was running a little rich on the top end. Jetting wise, this is a 140 main jet, which is the stock jetting. So then just play around, I took the airbox lid off and it ran significantly better. And I was like, that's kind of funny because on my Pilot, which is all stock, I'm running the same jetting. It seems to run perfect with it. And I thought, you know what, I kind of was looking at this airbox lid and I'm like, you know, it seems kind of small compared to mine. So I went and compared to mine, and this is mine. I didn't realize it had been modified, but yeah, somebody made a big throat to it instead of the little one there. So I swapped airbox lids on it and it ran infinitely better. So I think that's the only thing this thing needs anymore is just a little airbox lid modification. It should be good to go. Yeah, let's go take it for a spin quick. Yeah, I think we're done. It seems to run good. Sounds just like mine, feels the same way too, so I think we should have a happy customer again here. Follow along for the next video.